live stream is good. So that's all fine. Right. So. Do you have a USB stick? Because the web synchronization for some reason is not working.
You won't have hard drive.
No, but that won't work because it's to a PC and that won't work from a Mac format. It will work with mine, but it won't work with that. Because something's wrong with this this USB stick. It won't load properly.
I mean, are you on speaking first?
Who is speaking first?
Okay, so what we could do is do this off my laptop and then we could try and switch over.
But that is connected how? Via Wi-Fi?
By Bluetooth, but it's tricky. Like, it was being very finicky this morning, so I'm just
right. So well, for some reason this USB stick at the moment, for whatever reason, now after having put it in your computer, it won't even mount on this one. So I don't know what the hell's wrong there, but it's not good. Because I've got another way to do it. I can try using the SD card reader in the drone. Wait, I'm fixing this here now. Wait. What?
An SD card.
Yeah, exactly. So I then need the. Do you have an SD card reader in that computer?
Good question. I'm not sure.
No, it's not to that. Does it have USB-C? Is that power or is that USB-C? No?
No, that's power.
No? Okay, so that isn't going to work. Everyone, a quick question. Does anyone by chance have a USB stick?
A memory stick?
Yeah. Ah, right.
Man with everything.
Because somehow my memory stick is the web sync doesn't work and my memory stick is somehow broken. So otherwise perfect, right?
It has USB-C if you
yeah, all right. Let's have a go with this then. Fingers crossed. And he's a PC user, so that ought to work. So let's try this. No, don't want to do that. Come on. Next slide. Alright, so this might work now. Try that and have a look on there and see if that works. Samsung, in Cork, yeah. And if you load that one, that should there. And just go to the, it's a bit text in blue, but that doesn't matter. Go to the end and to the penultimate slide. This one here. Oh, yeah. Go to this one here. Whatever. Go to that one there and play that. Just go here and there. and then yeah, that's playing here. Now just press this click and see if the video plays. Yeah, it does. It's perfect. Do we have sound?
Yeah, sorry.
All right.
Take the train. But when you press order by train in Europe, everything gets
Yeah, here it's coming out. It's a bit quiet, but
We can turn it off.
yeah, that's fine. All right, we're good. Yeah, all right, that's all working. Perfect. So the slides are working. The live stream is running. We'll get there with the technology eventually. 2 minutes before the beginning of the.
Everyone thought it was 5 minutes late.
Yeah.
We're more like the French. The Germans.
But I think this is, however, this is a bit of a misnomer and everything works on time.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I can say now out of a difficult experience of German some timekeeping, having lived there a while.
Yes.
Hello.
This is the Sarah. It
It is Sarah, yeah.
Straightforward.
How's the campaign going as well?
It's been a bit quiet because it's been summer. We'll see. Yeah, it's there's a big competition for places like this. Yeah, it's like let's see. So, yeah, September, October, November, quite busy going visit as many people in as many places as possible. Yeah. Well, also connected to these types of things, trying to organise events about railways and transport.
Do you want me to?
I'm happy about context in Germany at the moment because the Liberal Transport Minister is such a disaster. At one level it's a disaster, but at another level it's given transport policy a higher profile than it's had before. Which, exactly. Which in some perverse ways then somehow to our advantage. So that's not too bad. So let's see. Might work out. I might end up getting a position which is borderline electable, or I might be in a position which I'm like 2 or 3 positions below what we get. The party's struggling a bit in the opinion polls at the moment. It's taking a bit of a hit as a result of being in the coalition. Yeah, right. It looks at the moment as well. It looks like a very unhappy coalition in Berlin just at the moment. Not only because of policies actually, to at least as big as their personalities, where it's not developed a good human dynamic between the leading characters. Anyway, but let's see. So I'm optimistic. I'm going to learn some stuff. And it connects to all these different railway things. So this project I'm presenting here now is not a project of the party, but it has a kind of motivation.
Your last one was quite interesting, and that's a lovely shot of Cove.
This is from this morning.
Oh,
yeah, out of the ferry.
Oh, fantastic.
Wonderful sunny morning. The ferry's pulling in, so we were up on deck. This is from like 10:30 this morning.
Oh, fantastic. That's brilliant. Yeah.
Oh, we've got some people watching online.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, great. Hello, people online. We'll be starting in a minute, people online. Hey, hello.
Oh, poor Dominic. That email, you set Dominic off anyway. The email you sent. Did you send forward an email about some Cork neutrality league or something? Yeah. Oh, you set Dominic off.
I sent it to the I don't know why you're not on that list. And I went through it today and I was saying, add in all the rest of it.
And I had a great
Indeed. Sorry, Stephen.
you're great.
I'll CC you straight away. And I haven't actually, I was a junior one, otherwise
I know.
No, but otherwise, well, you'll see with the presentation. It's been a very, very interesting trip.
Already? What do you want to get in the week? I had meetings in Brussels, so we were left from Brussels yesterday morning. Took the ferry overnight from here. I'm going to Strabane in Northern Ireland tomorrow. We're Dublin tonight. Strabane tomorrow. Then taking out 3 of the going around Strabane, which is also in the All-Island Rail Review. Then going to Belfast, staying over there, and then taking the Enterprise train south to Dublin for the event on Monday night, we're going to Dublin. And then on Tuesday, going and investigating everything in Bosland about how easy it is to make trains and ferry connections. Not regular, no, right, so I'm told.
So you can't go from Cork, and you can't go from Cork.
Right, well, you can't go from honestly in the morning, you can't go from anywhere. So my only option was to stay over in the Wexford, because that was the only thing you could literally do. So that's like, those are some of the types of things that we then highlight in these projects. It's basically so that actually those things shouldn't be too hard to solve. You've got everything you need there. You need to get some people sitting down together to coordinate that a bit. You need either an early morning train from Cork and Dublin, or you try to get the ferry company to run the ferry an hour or two later or whatever. Because otherwise, going that way, unless you start from Wexford, you can't get to London that day. If you do it on the later ferry, I think you might get to Cardiff, but you can't get further. Which has been like everything.
He's currently, he was supposed to be on the 2 o'clock train from Holyhead to Dublin, and because of the rain strikes, he only got there an hour ago.
Oh really? Oh shit.
I didn't know he's on Holyhead.
Oh okay, because I'm told Great Western is only 3 I'm hopeful I haven't got any instruction. I have family in South Wales, so I don't really be needing to count on them. But maybe
Checking the phone book to make sure the number is correct.
Alright, point taken. Yeah, anyway, so unfortunately for Cork, right, this is just at the beginning of these investigations of Red Island. I'm going to tell you a bit what I'm going to tell you. What I'm going to go looking for, basically. Yeah, exactly, right. Just going to get another cup of coffee.
Grace will kick things off. So as I say, we'll kick things off. Folks, we'll kick things off in about 2 minutes. Get your cup of tea and we'll kick things off in 2 minutes.
Oh yeah.
Maybe we can take that seat there and then sort of make the camera orientated to whoever is talking.
It's advantage of knowing a local.
So,
Daniel streaming to that camera there.
done streaming from that camera, and it will be pointed at whoever is talking.
And if it's not, if it's not pointing, it's my fault.
Let's see what happens. I feel like because it's a supply trip, even in not even vehicles, we have lots of incidents. My first is nice little cloud in the let alone trying to do it off the ferry this morning. I think that was probably too optimistic from the off.
Grace, come into the parlour and set things up.
That is fantastic, as I next to it.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. Good afternoon, and I'd like to ask for a little bit of cueness. I just want to get the event going so that we can take advantage of the time, and then you can chat away later afterwards. But you're all really welcome. This is my constituency office. I'm Grace O'Sullivan, for those who haven't met you before. I'm delighted that it's here on a very busy street in Cork. It's great to have it in such a central place. And today I'm delighted to welcome my colleague, member of the European Parliament, Kieran Cuff, who was elected back in 2019 with myself. And we're your two Green MEPs in the European Parliament, so from 2019 to 2024, and our desire would be that it will be and beyond. that has to be. And then I'm here with John Wirt, who is, I suppose, an expert in rail, and Kieran in sail rail, because since 2019 Kieran has been sail rail back and forth from various different centres in Europe in his work. So both of our experts will speak to you about their recent journey and experiences, and maybe with your vision for the future. And before I start, I just want to thank Rebecca, who keeps the show on the road here in Cork, for organising everything today. So thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So there you go.
Well, thank you, and thanks for coming along this afternoon. As Grace said, I'm Kieran Cuff, MEP, Green MEP for Dublin, and Grace and I represent the Irish Green Party in the European Parliament of 700 MEPs. But we're not alone, thankfully. We have actually 70 colleagues, so about 10% of the full European Parliament is made up of Greens and our colleagues from related parties around Europe. A lot from Germany, a lot from France, but we work really well with our Nordic cousins from Finland, Denmark, and Sweden. In fact, every month we have a Nordic corner breakfast where we talk to our green colleagues from the northern parts. Obviously, during COVID, that went online, so we'd there because it was at sometimes 8 o'clock in the morning European time. So sometimes at 7 o'clock we'd be snoring with our muesli. talking about what was going on in Sweden and Denmark and Finland. But I just say that because to kind of point out that we're part of a European family of Greens, and formally we're part of the Greens European Free Alliance at a European level, but obviously we are also members of the Green Party in Ireland. What are we doing this afternoon? We're talking about low carbon travel. I think all of us realise that transport and travel is a huge part, not just of Ireland's emissions, but of the European Union's emissions and of global emissions. And air travel in particular has increased dramatically over the last few years. And the challenge of air travel is it's not just about the burning, the production of carbon dioxide, it's also something called the non-CO2 effects. When you burn jet fuel at 30,000 feet, you get the contrails and you have tiny particles which form clouds, which provide additional warming. And this is between 2 and 3 times a multiplier of the raw CO2 emissions. So air travel is particularly challenging to address. Quite often you hear Michael O'Leary say, oh, it's only 2% of emissions. But multiply that by 2 or 3 and you realise that air travel is particularly challenging for the environment. People often say, what about? And you know, I get that. What about concrete? What about agriculture? What about energy? And within the European Parliament we're trying to tackle all of this. But this afternoon is about simply talking about how you can travel with a lower carbon footprint. We don't want to put a gloss on it. We don't want to say it's wonderful. There are plus sides and there are downsides. But John and myself and Andrea, who works with us occasionally in the European Parliament, we are, as they say, fresh off the boat this morning because our ferry from Roscoff to Ringaskiddy just came in a few hours ago, and actually Cormac was just arrived, was on that ferry, so I think the term is we press ganged him into it, knocked him out. Well, he was on the boat already, but when he woke up he said, I'm going to the meeting. So it's great to have Cormac here as well. So I will just talk for about 15 minutes now, and then John will talk for about 15 minutes. I'm going to focus on the sail rail aspect, in other words, going from Ireland to mainland Europe. I said Sail Rail Europe because I think some of the posters said Sail Rail to Europe, and somebody wisely pointed out that we are in Europe. So delicately I do on that first slide.
And you made me a TD,
oh, and I made you a TD. That's what happens when you're putting together a PowerPoint presentation on the bus from Ringaskiddy.
What political implications of everything?
At least I spelled her name right. So, mercies, Grace. Then that is the view actually this morning from the ferry coming across into past Cove into Cork City. It was extraordinary as a view, and I know, yeah, you get to see lovely clouds if you're in an airplane, but when you're in a ship, you really, or a train, you see, I think, a lot more of what's going on in many places. So, thank you, Grace, for the intro. John and myself will talk now, and then I want to open it up to the floor, because I'm sure you have questions about all of this as well. Last night, John and I and Andrea, we sat out in Roscoff, and actually we found a place to have a bite to eat, and that was the view we were looking at. And it beats sitting in Terminal 2 departures in Dublin Airport, let me tell you. And it was lovely, there was a beautiful, the sun just came out, that golden hour. So that was the lovely view we had yesterday evening. This is not the boat we took yesterday. This is actually, on Monday I had to sail rail to Brussels from Dublin. So that's the place. I was on the high-speed craft heading out of Dublin with a kind of a Turner sky, a beautiful kind of watery sky. And that's the boat I often take, the big Ulysses, which is a huge boat. When it was launched 20 years ago, it was the largest car ferry in Europe. And it just goes over and back to Holyhead. Very solid, very stable. Takes 3 hours. The fast ferry takes 2 hours. But in the winter months when it gets a bit rocky, sometimes the fast ferry, in fact the fast ferry doesn't run from, I think, the end of October to March. But the Ulysses year round does that route, and it's quite stable and a nice ship. And there's the view just coming up through Cove this morning.
You're welcome.
The usual fee, I'm sure.
She just painted the house.
And then the downside. We got off the ferry at Ringaskiddy, and it was like, where do we go next? And it's like, you know, everybody's very nice, but we kind of walked out across the car park, no footpath. Google Maps was our saviour, and the Wi-Fi was working. But we walked 10 minutes down the road, there was a fella driving a pickup truck from the port, and I kind of stopped him, and he says, "Ah, yeah, just go around the corner and you get the bus." Nice that there's a fella in a pickup truck who tells you, but it'd be even nicer if there was a sign in the ferry terminal.
Or pavement, even.
Footpaths would be nice.
Yeah.
I know, you know, we sometimes over ask what we're looking for, but footpaths connecting the port would be nice. So the sun was shining, which was nice, and Andrea and myself, John had his fold-up bicycle, which is there, but we stood there for an hour, and a couple of buses came and went, and eventually a bus came and got us into Cork City. Thankfully the sun was shining, but I wouldn't like to be doing that in the middle of winter. So connectivity is one thing we will talk.
Bus shelter is there?
There is a bus
Okay.
shelter there, but there was 22 of us
Yeah.
with a lot of luggage.
Yeah.
This is what we did over the last 24 hours. I don't recommend this. You know, we were doing this just to get some footage and to do it. I generally, when I'm doing it, I just go Eurostar straight to London, 4 hours up to Holyhead, 2 or 3 hours over to Dublin. So it's kind of 11 hours, 12 hours between waiting around. So I'm not suggesting that you kind of, if you're thinking of going to Brussels, that you have to do this, but I just want to show it as an example. We took a Thalys train. Thalys is merging with Eurostar at the moment, so it will be a Eurostar in a few months' time. Down to Paris, took the metro across Paris from Gare du Nord to Montparnasse. Then we took a train to Morlaix, and then a bus because, and John will talk more about this, the railway line got washed out by a storm a few years ago, so there was a 30-kilometre bus ride, and then the ferry straight across. So, and it all worked out fine, you know.
How many hours? From
That would
Glasgow?
take, well, from Brussels it was 24, but the ferry is
12 hours.
12 hours. And that includes a night's sleep, so
Yeah.
actually I thought it was very quick.
Yeah.
And sometimes I take the night ferry from Holyhead and you only get 3 hours sleep
Yeah.
before they kind of roar at you to get off. So having 8 hours sleep was just pure magic. Why do it? It's good for the planet. And I talked about the non-CO2 effects earlier, but it's about 5 times better for the planet. I'll show you the figures on that a bit later on, and there's a few sites you can have a look at. I think it's often more sociable. I bumped into Cormac, but I'm always bumping into people. And, you have chats, and you know, as Brexit went from bad to worse, the kind of conversations you had with somebody in Chester or Crewe, you got a sense of Middle England and the concerns that people had. I don't want to, you know, over-egg the pudding on this, but it is a nice way if you have the time. And you know, Grace does, I'm not sure how often, if at all, Grace is doing it. But look, my kids are grown up, they're happy to get rid of me, and so I often have the luxury of time, and particularly living in Dublin, because it's a lot more difficult for Grace to get to and from Brussels, from Tramore, and every time and I fly a lot as well, let me tell you, and I'll show you the numbers on that too. But early on in the mandate, I'd arrive kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in Dublin Airport at like 5:30 in the morning. Grace would have got like, she'd be asleep on a seat. So it's not easy to travel, but look, it's part of the job, and we love the job. And but the point I'm making is it's a lot harder if you're not in Dublin. It's harder from Cork or Tramore or places like that. Better leg room. Sometimes the Wi-Fi is good, particularly on the boats. It can be good. Avoiding airports, I have to say, the last few years, if you can avoid an airport, it's not bad. It's not bad. Greenhouse gas emissions. So flying would be about 120 kilos of CO2 from Cork, 118 to Dublin. So I've just put in 120. Roughly speaking, as much as 15 kilos CO2 from the ferry, because it's a long 700-kilometre route, I think, or 600.
Something,
Yeah. And the rail, 24 kilos. Depends how you calculate the rail. A lot of that rail journey was in France, so a lot of the emissions are really low because a lot of the French electricity is nuclear. We all have different views on nuclear, but it is a low carbon fuel. I think Grace and I both think there's lots of other challenges with nuclear that certainly it's best to avoid it, but the emissions are low, and roughly 1/5 of the emissions of flying. Costs. This is a real challenge. It's expensive, and you know, I just looked on the way over last night. I just looked. What if we left right now from here in Cork and wanted to, for some bizarre reason, get to Brussels by tomorrow evening? So I looked online. You could buy the ferry for €115. The train ticket 102 to Paris, 91 Brussels. But these train fares, they go up and down, and it's madness, just like buying a Ryanair flight the day before you fly. You know, not what you want to do. So it can be quite expensive. I would say flying at 1 day's notice can be expensive too. And I have I'll show you my nerdy table later on. My flight between Dublin and Brussels, sometimes during COVID it was a tenner, but sometimes it can be €450 for a one-way flight. You're a captive audience going to Brussels. So and obviously the European Parliament pays for all of this, and that's a luxury that we have, but flights are not always dirt cheap. And particularly at peak times, they can be very, very expensive. And this was the actual cost for getting here and getting all the way to Dublin. This is what we paid. Again, it was kind of, these fares were bought just within the last few weeks. We didn't have the discount cards on SNCF or on Palace, so it was expensive and came to 429 total. But I mean, if you shop around, you can get that rail fare for a lot less than €35. The ferry was expensive, but we each had a cabin. So I know John well, but not that well. We had separate cabins. So it was expensive. So I'm not trying to sell this on the basis of cheap as chips. The one thing I would say is that the sail rail from Dublin to London is always €60, and it doesn't go up and down. It's a great ticket. And one thing I'm working on with Eamon Ryan and others is to get a sail rail ticket for Ireland to France. And negotiations are underway on that, and I was on to Eamon Ryan's office yesterday, and there's a bit of red tape, everybody's blaming each other. It hasn't quite happened yet, but hopefully it will happen in the months ahead. So yeah, €60 to get to London, a lovely old-fashioned paper ticket. You can upgrade €20 to get club class, free snacks, good Wi-Fi. I do Zoom calls often on that trip. A better sea view than most. Free wine if you wish to do that before you hop on a 4-hour train down to London. I wouldn't recommend it, and haven't done it. And then the Eurostar, again, it's dynamic pricing. It can be €50 if you buy it long enough in advance. It can be €250 if you buy it the day before. And by air, as I said, it could be 200, but it can be very expensive, or during COVID it was very cheap. Door to door. People say, oh, how long is the flight? An hour and 20 minutes. Ah, sure, why would you ever think of taking the boat? But it's not an hour and 20 minutes. You have to be at the airport 2 hours in advance. You have to get to the airport, etc., etc. When you take the Eurostar, you end up in Gare du Midi, which is, for me, it's 10 minutes from my apartment in Brussels. So more or less for me, it's 12 hours, by air 5 hours. So it's not quite, 2 hours to Brussels. There is time at either end. And the good thing is I can get work done. I'm a white-collar worker, which means that I can sit down, I can read, I can write, I can think, I can plan my day ahead. And certainly for me, it's a very productive space, particularly because in Brussels we're both back-to-back with meetings, so having a bit of time to kind of contemplate the week or the fortnight ahead is a good thing. This is the nerdy bit. I have a spreadsheet of all my travel over the last 4 years. You can't read it there, but I've pulled out a few figures for you. I have travelled 188,356 kilometres over the last year. That's about 4.5 times around the world. 100,000 of those.
1 year or 4 years?
4 years.
4 years. Alright, sorry, I was going to say. After a year, I was like, flipping hell.
But the majority, just over 50% of those have been low carbon. So that's a lot of trains, a lot of ferries. About 50 sail rail tickets. Do I have the numbers there? About 50 sail rail journeys, about 100 flights. So obviously I'm travelling, I'm a frequent flyer, I'm travelling a lot more than most people. Why can't I just do all of this on Zoom? Well, during COVID we did a lot of it on Zoom, and we did a lot of the voting on Zoom. But there's very real concerns about remote voting, the pressure you would be under, or the hacking of the system. So I can understand why we have to go back to in-person voting. And who knows what kind of pressure I might be under if I was voting, or the kind of pressure somebody from Bulgaria or Finland or Cyprus might be under if they're voting remotely. I would get concerned long term if we kept that remote voting. So we're back to in-person. So I have to be in Brussels, as does Grace, for the votes in both committee and plenary sessions down in Strasbourg. didn't really mention Strasbourg, but obviously once a month we go to Strasbourg for 4 days, and the Parliament sits there. Why? Well, in a sense, it keeps the peace between France and Germany. It's just another part of the madness of the European Parliament. I also have a table of, you know, how much have I spent, or how much taxpayers' money have I used in the last 4 years on my travel. 46,844 euro. The plane, more or less 20 cents a kilometre. The low carbon stuff about 27. So about 35% more expensive to do the low carbon option. And one of the reasons for that is going back to aviation agreements, the Chicago Convention back in 1950 something. Essentially, there are no taxes on the kerosene that you put into a plane. There are taxes on the diesel that you put into the ship or into the train. There's taxes on the electricity for a lot of the trains. So it's not a level playing field. And one of the things I have been working on through the Transport Committee of the European Parliament is to have fairer fares and to ensure that aviation pays its fair share of taxation on the kerosene that goes into an airplane. And a lot of that the can has been kicked down the road quite often, but hopefully by 2027 we will see some taxation there. How much carbon? Well, in my case, 16 tons on travel over the last 4 years. And I said my travel has been more or less half and half low carbon and flying. The interesting thing is the flights were responsible for, for 13 tons of carbon, and the low carbon for 3 tons. So that's more or less the comparison. So a lot less carbon from taking the train or the ferry, which I think is of interest. You can go and look at these numbers on these sites. There's Eco Passenger looks at every single train journey, not just a generic figure, but you can look up every journey. Eurostar, Irish Rail. Irish Rail, the carbon footprint of rail, it's pretty high because we use diesel trains, and the occupancy is not as high. When we came down from Paris to Morlaix yesterday, it was 2 double-decker trains popped together. So there's probably 1,200 people on that train to begin with. An Irish Rail train might have 300 on a crowded day. So it's not as carbon efficient as it might be. And then of course I just want to mention seat61.com. Some of you know it. Brilliant guy called Mark Smith who runs this website that shows you pretty much how to get anywhere in the world, if you can, by trains and ferries, including Ireland. And the man on seat 61, that's seat 61 is the seat he likes to get on the Eurostar, the premier seat on the Eurostar. So my final, I think, slide or two, what could improve? The connectivity. You know, we arrived in Ringaskiddy this morning and it was an hour for the bus and there wasn't even a footpath between the ferry and the bus stop. The Wi-Fi, it's particularly bad on Eurostar. It's good on the ferries, generally. The terminals are a mixed bag. A sail rail ticket for Ireland to France, as I said. I think the foot passengers were very low down in the pecking order. Even this morning, would the car drivers on deck 3 go to their cars? Would the car drivers on deck 4? It was like rubbing salt in your wounds. And then eventually, are there any cars left? Okay, we'll let the foot passengers on. So little things like that can grate a bit. And sometimes there are reasons for it, but sometimes you kind of think that you're travelling steerage and it could improve. I would like to see more transparency on the ferry emissions. I use a UK site to calculate it, but I would like to know more about the exact emissions from the ferry. Signage, I mentioned earlier. A level playing field on the taxes, I think, is also what we really need to see. And after all of that, I can only say bon voyage. I've done it about 50 times over the last 4 years. I've never had to spend a night in Holyhead, but I've come close so often. So that's me. John, over to you.
Right. So, let me find my slides. Wait, okay. Here we go. Right. If that will load. Right, perfect. So thank you very much indeed, and so certainly as well, thanks to Kieran and his team as well for helping to organise this part of this project. I'm very, very happy to be in Ireland because Ireland is the last of all of the European Union countries with a railway.
for me to have gone to in this project for reasons which I'll explain in just a second. So I'm particularly happy to be here to be able to make this presentation. Having said that, we've only just got here, and so some of my investigations of Irish Rail are coming up over the next few days. So I might have some more profound conclusions within the next week than I've been able to give you so far. I'll explain what that bridge is in just a minute when I go through the presentation. Anyway, so what am I doing and what is cross-border rail? As you can tell from my accent, I am British, but I live in Germany, and I'm actually becoming a German citizen this month as well because I need a proper EU passport. So, so what happened? So, as well as actually running this project, it's not a project of the Green Party. I am a member of the German Green Party, and the motivation for conducting this project came from an ex-Green member of the European Parliament, Michel Kramer. So he put together a report in 2015 called Missing Links in English, which basically said here are 15 places in Europe with very little investment you could fix cross-border railway lines. And during the COVID lockdown, I was bored and said to myself, well, hang on a minute, what happened in the 6 years in between? Did anything get fixed? And the answer was, one of the 15 lines have got fixed. They replaced 2 kilometers of track at the border between Bavaria and Czechia, and so one of the 15 projects have come into existence. So I started to ask myself the question in all these different places, well, what's going on, right? Why are we not making progress managing to fix these problems at European borders? And then I posted on social media about this, and plenty of my followers said, hey, but here's another problem. Well, there's another place you should go. And out of that came an enormous project to try to document all of these difficulties and problems with cross-border railways in the European Union. And now I'll come to the Irish aspect of that in a minute. This, for example, is the cross-border station not so far from Strasbourg. This is Lauterbourg at the very northeastern corner of Alsace. French train, German train. German train runs once an hour from the border station into Germany. French train has about 6 a day with a massive gap in the timetable, meaning you can't actually really cross the border here with any degree of efficiency. And as you can see here, everything's in really bad condition at the border station. It's basically like a field with a few tracks in the middle of it here. It's very green. So this is one where you could quite easily, if you actually coordinated the timetables, you could improve the cross-border connections here. So what's the problem? National railway systems in Europe work comparatively well, but once you cross a border by train, everything becomes more complicated. The infrastructure, the level of service, the timetables, ticketing, everything is of poorer quality. And because these problems are cross-border, the European Union needs to step up in order to manage to begin to solve them. Now that means, to a greater extent, at least initially, the European Commission, before it then comes to you guys in the European Parliament. Here's another picture. This is the picture of my entire project last year. We have Poland on this side of the picture, Zgorzelec, Görlitz in Germany on this side, and you see the electrification masts end in the middle of the bridge. There was a 2003 agreement between Poland and Germany to electrify the entire Wrocław to Dresden line. Poland completed its thing by about 2015, and it built the mast to the middle of the bridge and said, hey, Germany, get on with the job. And they still haven't done it. Now, it's also wonderful. It's a wonderful place. There's the mill, there's the nicer river. It's really great. But this is just the symbol of the dysfunction that you have at European borders when it comes to railways. So, cross-border rail, the project was a 2022 project to cross all of the internal borders of the European Union that you can cross by train. So that's why I was missing Ireland, because Ireland has no internal border of the EU you can cross by train, only an external border of the European Union to Northern Ireland. So that's why I've not been to Ireland yet. To highlight the problems and propose the solutions, and then I've done 2 smaller projects this year. I went back to all of Germany's borders earlier this year, and now I've come to Ireland on this trip, and I'm going to do some further border crossings in Central Europe later in the month, and then finally going to Santiago de Compostela for a big EU conference there, and going from Berlin to Santiago de Compostela by train. And when there are no trains anymore, I take a folding bicycle with me, which is at the back there, to get across the borders, because in plenty of places there are certain European countries which are cut off the passenger rail network. There are 4 cross-border railway lines to Greece, for example, but none of them have any passenger trains on them. So therefore, I have the bicycle with me to cross the borders that you can't actually literally cross by train. So what are the specific issues? And then we'll come to some examples. Some cross-border tracks have fallen into disrepair, and so they're out of action. You can't use them anymore. And the question then is, could you reactivate those lines somehow? That's the first category. The second case is tracks exist, but passenger trains don't run, right? That's a bit easier than the first category, right? Maybe there are goods trains, or maybe there are no trains at all, but the track is literally there and is literally operable. The third is trains run, but the timetables are so bad no one can use them. And the fourth is there are informational ticketing problems that make things complicated at the border. Now, those are hard, and these should be comparatively easy. So they should be easier the further we get down the list. And so that brings us then, so just to recap, so those are all the places I went in 2022. I came up with a top 20 proposals of the places in that the European Union could solve the problems most easily out of that project. That's where I went then in the German map earlier, and now this is when that eventually comes up. These are then the places I'm now going if you're following what I'm doing digitally over the course of the next 2 months. So going to Ireland, lots of things in Central Europe, and then a big route through Spain and Portugal. What I'm then doing, and hence the thing for the beginning of this project, so at Cork initially, we're going to Dublin tonight. I'm going investigating everything in Northern Ireland tomorrow, particularly some of the proposals from the All-Ireland rail strategy, which has just come out, to go and look at that. I'm going to then check a few things around Newry on the Enterprise train, and then finally I'm going to go to the port that we've not really mentioned so far, to Rosslare, to look at how friendly that is. On timetables it doesn't look friendly at all, on Tuesday, before then actually then taking a ferry to Fishguard and then going on to London. So that will mean that together with what Kieran's normal routes are and what I'm going to be documenting, we should have a pretty complete picture of rail boat connectivity for all of the Irish ports. So far in the project, which started in June last year, I've crossed 160 railway borders so far, but there are about 450 railway borders in all of Europe, including dismantled or no longer active lines. So I've got a bit of a way to go. This is a funny picture. Actually, this is Czechia and this is Poland, and you can literally see the sleepers change quality and colour literally at the border, and there is the border stone on the picture there. Right. So just one example of each of the categories. So the first category is railway lines have fallen into disrepair, and so that's exactly what we found from Morlaix to Roscoff last night. So just a little section to the port. The map here, the purple line is arriving in Morlaix, the black line is the old railway, and the fatter grey line is the route I took on my bicycle to then go and investigate the infrastructure yesterday. So this is a picture taken with the drone that I have with me on these projects. I couldn't get closer than this, unfortunately, because there's some power lines crossing here which interfere with the drone signals. But you can just about make out there is a track, which is, there was a flood, like a thunderstorm, that turned that road into basically a torrent, which took all of the ground away underneath the railway line here, meaning basically the tracks were hanging in the middle of the air, right? Now this was in 2018, and there was a decision taken at that stage to not repair it. Now my question when I go investigating a place like this is, how hard would this be to repair? The answer is actually not very hard. There's only this particular section, there's only about 200 meters which you would need to manage to repair. But, and there's always a but, right? So they've done a bit of work on the drainage as well. This is the motorway bridge, which is just next to it. The problem is that the railway line and the railway track, the rest of it was in a really bad condition, right? Before the train literally got stopped due to the flood, the maximum speed was only 40 km/h on this line, right? So it had basically been left to rot, although in a partially operable state, for a couple of decades before eventually it was closed as a result of the flood. The joyous thing on this line, right, is this wonderful viaduct halfway along the line, right? Now, so that's the joy of these projects of cross-border rail. I'm going along to these extraordinary and wonderful places. And also what gives me hope for this thing is that actually it is a comparatively well-off region of Brittany. There are a number of small towns along the line, so even if we actually say it were to be only to serve French inhabitants living in Roscoff and the towns between Roscoff and Morlaix, it would still make sense to reactivate this line. Now, all of the track is all on the track bed is all usable still, but you would have to relay the tracks literally. You would be looking at a budget of something between 50 million and 100 million euros in order to manage to repair that line. So that would be one which is eminently
doable, but is politically requires from the region some action. Now the difficulty here is what Ireland is pursuing with the All-Ireland Rail Review, and France's railway strategy could not be more different. The All-Ireland Rail Review is trying to connect small and medium-sized places to the railway network. France's railway strategy is connect the big cities to Paris as quickly as possible. Now, in that strategy, Roscoff hasn't got a look in, unfortunately. Yeah? Now, to me, this is one which I will definitely be keeping an eye on because it is not complicated or particularly expensive to fix. And I found quite a lot of those all over Europe. And if you're interested in those, I can happily answer questions. If you've been to, you want to know why is there no train between A and B, chances are I've probably been there and I can probably tell you. So that's the first category, right? Reactivating lines which have fallen into disrepair. The second category is tracks which exist but there aren't any trains running. So we're in the other end of Europe here, we're at the border of Slovenia to Croatia. Between Novo Mesto is an important town in southern Slovenia, and Karlovac, the fifth biggest town in Croatia. And just at the border section near the town of Metlika, there's no train between the two. The pink lines and the purple lines, there are trains. So nice modern diesel, but nice modern train on the Slovenian side. And that is the border bridge. The river is the border between the two, and that is what you see in the middle of the bridge. They cancelled the trains at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and they never reactivated them. So basically, because there is no determination, particularly from the Croatian side. Unfortunately, Croatia has one of the most dysfunctional railways of any European country. And that's what you're confronted with at the moment. So essentially, the track and everything is in place in order to manage to run a railway service here. And since COVID, Croatia has also joined Schengen, so you don't even have to do any border controls here, right? Now, there are, for example, at the Croatian border, there are four lines from Croatia to Slovenia and one line from Croatia to Hungary, which are in exactly this situation. Tracks are in place, but there are no trains running there. Right now, that should be comparatively easy and simple and quick to fix. So even easier to fix, we're now, again, I'm jumping all over Europe, we're at the border of Estonia to Latvia, right? So if you want to take the train from Tallinn to Riga, yeah? Now, it's the border town, really interesting little town with the border running through the middle of it, Valka. And there's the railway station on the Estonian side, modern train, nice neat railway station. Interesting little town, that's the train that goes on to Riga. Now, timetable coordination. So if you take the first train in the morning, 8:12 from Tallinn, it gets you to Valga at 11:23. Problem is, there are only 2 trains a day onwards, and the next one is at 15:03. So your only option, of course, if you take that one, it arrives 15:26, which means you miss it by 15 minutes. So your only option of doing this is to wait for 3.5 hours in Valga in order to manage to carry on your journey. Right now, also, there are no technical difficulties here. The train can run across because all of the technical standards on both sides of the border are exactly the same. But each side is blaming the other side and not wanting to fix the problems. Now, when I've gone and presented these conclusions to the European Commission in Brussels and said, hey, like, could you basically sit these people down with each other and solve this type of problem? They said, well, yeah, but we didn't really know there was a problem there. So it's like, it's a little bit weird that you're requiring a blogger who's doing a project about this stuff to basically tell you where these problems are. Anyway, that also happens, for example, at the France-Italy border, if you're going from Nice to Ventimiglia and on to Genova, for example. So it's not only something in Central Eastern Europe. And then last but not least, the country that frustrates me most in railway policy in total in Europe is Spain. It has impeccable infrastructure, but the other aspects don't work. So there are 3 cross-border railway lines between France and Spain which have data problems, right? Now I'll explain what this means. So they are Port Boussabert on the Mediterranean coast, La Tour de Carol in the middle of the Pyrenees, and Irun-Ondaye at the Atlantic coast. There are trains on all 3 of those connections, but can you find them? Right? So, all of the rail nerds, including the man in seat 61, use the German Railways travel planner because it's the best one of all of the European railways, right? So, if you ask the German Railways travel planner, can you get me from La Tour de Carol, which is here, to Barcelona? It sends you first to Toulouse, which is here, right? Then to Narbonne, which is here, and then it sends you down here to Barcelona, right? What the hell's going on? There is a train, right? Takes 3 and a bit hours, that goes the whole way, but the operator of the train, Rodalies in Catalonia, does not upload its timetables to the international timetable databases. So you have to know that the train exists on that database of the government of Catalonia. It actually is a pretty good connection, but unless you're a specialist, you don't even find that the train exists. Yeah? Now, even worse, try at this one at the Atlantic coast, right? There is, if you ask Deutsche Bahn, it says, sorry, we don't know how the hell to do that, right? We can't even find you a connection, yeah? But there, on that one, there is a train every half an hour across that border, run by the Basque regional government. But again, they don't put the they don't share the data with other railway companies, and hence you end up with a problem of not being able to find the train, right? So again, if that should be even easier to fix than the timetable coordination problem, right? So those are the different types of problems that you get at different European borders. So I'm just going to finish with a quick video which shows some of these stories. It's 2 minutes of the video, and then we'll do a round of Q&A. So let's put the volume up to max on here, and this should explain.
Faced with the climate crisis, we all need to fly and drive less and take the train more. But when you cross a border by train in Europe, everything gets harder than when you stay within one country. In the summer of 2022, I, John Worth, put all of this to the test with the cross-border rail project. I crossed every internal border of the EU you can cross by train. That was 95 borders in total. I travelled more than 30,000 kilometres on the railways, and where trains do not run any longer, I took to my folding bicycle. And the rest was by bus, ferry and taxi. What did I find? In some places, rail lines have fallen into disrepair and would need to be rebuilt. But many of these are hard or expensive to fix, even if, like at Canfranc on the Spain-France border, they're in wonderful places. Solutions are easier where tracks exist, but passenger trains do not run. It would be simple to extend trains from Ormenio in Greece to Svilengrad in Bulgaria, or from Turmantas in Lithuania to Daugavpils in Latvia. The infrastructure and the trains for these services exist already. In other places, trains run, but the timetables are so bad no one can use them. I was the only passenger on a train between Mons in Belgium and Ornois in France, and was stuck for 3 hours at the Estonia-Latvia border at Valga, because timetables are not coordinated. And there were other absurdities. Trains from Vigo in Spain to Porto in Portugal are diesel on an electrified line. Dilapidated infrastructure through Poland between Liberec in Czechia and Zittau in Germany slows trains down there. And tickets are crazy expensive when booking from Germany to Strasbourg. Above all, my message to the European Union, and especially Transport Commissioner Adina Valian, who received postcards from me during the project, is that we are supposed to live in a borderless Europe. But when it comes to railways, borders very much still exist, and the EU's railway policy is failing. This is not only about infrastructure, because that is okay in many places. The EU needs to make sure passenger trains operate in all of the places where they could run, that timetables are coordinated and regular, and that booking tickets is easy, and that passenger rights are guaranteed. So, in short, taking a train across a border within the European Union should be as simple as taking one within one country.
Right, so that's all from me.
That was absolutely brilliant. I don't know how you feel, but I just feel like jumping on a train over some borders somewhere. But really impressive, really important information for policymakers, for citizens, for all of you, for all of us, because you know, there are opportunities, you can see that, for change, not only from an environmental perspective, but from a social perspective as well. So over to yourselves now, if you have these experts here, if you want to throw out some questions. So we have a question at the back first, yeah?
Maybe if you'd give your name and if you're with an
I'm
organisation.
Darren, I'm the coordinator for the Cork Transport and Mobility Forum. So some of the things you were saying there, disconnect, I'm afraid similar problems can come across my desk, even within Cork County. Like for instance, the local link buses are amazing at getting people to towns that then can travel up to Cork City. But there's so many people who live in the city without a car who love to visit West Cork with no idea these buses exist and the timetable doesn't go. I'd say before I start talking about the negative and asking questions, I'd say a positive experience in terms of the sailing. I went to an event in Wales a good many years ago now, the opposite. I picked up a ticket the day before, I cycled down to Rosslare, I cycled onto the ship, I cycled off to the ship. The only problem is, I don't believe the Vale of Glamorgan, the name is a lie, it's hilly as hell. But what I was able to do there is I had to bring 300 or 400 kilos of stuff literally on my bike with a trailer, which just wouldn't have been possible any other way. I can carry more than the people who drop stuff in the car. But recently, you know, I'm coordinating traffic business board, we're a partner in an EU project, an Interreg project, and we had a meeting in Portugal. I could fly for 50 quid to take a bike from Rosslare to Bilbao, 750 quid. Now, I could have dropped down that a little by if I was sharing a cabin, but I was going on my own, or if I could sleep in the steerage, but that's not appropriate on these sort of trips. And you just can't justify that. I came across exactly the same problem in Spain in terms of the timetables just don't exist. It's exactly that thing. I speak fluent Spanish, and I could go onto all the websites in Spain. And if I could get to Vigo, so I speak Portuguese, I get to Vigo. The Portuguese railways told me what's happening on the Spanish trains as far as Vigo, even if they are diesel. I thought that was the easy bit. But to get from Bilbao to Vigo, there is no information, none. Cork is full of Spanish people, so I knew locals in all of those places, and I asked them, what's the story? They said, yeah, you just throw the bike on the train. Where do I find the timetable? They go, nobody knows the timetable. You turn up at the station and you wait till there's a train. And apparently, the locals told me that, and so it's just a disaster. Now, I have another meeting in December in Rome, and I should be able to go Cork, Roscoff, hop on a train to Paris, and go Paris to Rome. But I know how many hours I spent researching the trip across Spain, and it got me nowhere. So, you know, where do we start? So the man in Street 61. But also, this is critical national infrastructure. And when I'm putting in, you know, submissions on national infrastructure plans, this is critical national infrastructure, not just for pedestrian, but also for freight. We should be moving freight to and from the ports by rail. There's no point in doing that if they can't get off at the other end in Roscoff. And you know, what are we going to do about this? You know, and it just, I know Estonia is planning on spending, you know, literally billions on putting a rail link to Finland, but they can't spend a thing. So my questions are, one, how do we go about actually planning these journeys? And two, how do we go about using our power as citizens, or in my position, where I got a position like that, where I am feeding into these plans? How do we make a difference? How do we change this situation? And how do we, because it won't change until there's a public outcry. So how do we bring this to the media? How do we bring this into everyday discourse?
Yeah, no, it's very good. It's good.
Should we take 3 questions?
Yeah.
Come back to them.
That's a small
We
question.
had maybe if you could say who you are.
I'm Tina, sorry, I'm humble. I'm a local candidate for local election for next year. My question is that in regards to some of the borders that were closed during COVID and they haven't been reopened. Do we know if any of that is in relation to them trying to stop migration in any way, or is there any kind of undercurrent there of trying to, you know, keep them closed, or is it simply down to just lack of interest in putting the investment in?
Sure. Good question.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Just quickly, there'll never be a public outcry about this because, you know, let's face it, people think we're probably all a bit crazy in here. Like, you know what I mean? Spending hours and hours and hours on lengthy journeys. I think it's the right thing to do, and I do it myself. But you know, there's never going to be a public outcry. So it's something. So you're going to have to make it to try and encourage people to change over. You're going to really have to make it really good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think, it was a great presentation from both. Kieran slightly downplayed the misery of the life of a foot passenger. You don't need your last on. So you're waiting for ages. Okay, everyone else, particularly a night ferry. You know, the drivers are tucking in. You know, getting tucked into their cabins, where you're sitting in a drafty warehouse. You know, waiting to be last on, to be sort of bussed onto the boat. You know, and then you're last out. You're the one that's waiting for trying to catch a connection, a connecting train, and yet you're last off. So I think that could easily be improved. There have to be certain basic standards of where people are waiting. That Holyhead terminal, waiting Holyhead for that night train.
Yeah.
It's just miserable. And the other thing I suppose, and not to put too much of a low vibe on it, it was announced last November by the then Taoiseach that there was going to be a joint sail rail ticket between big fanfare with Macron and Micheál Martin. It's going to happen. It's going to be in place by next summer. Total radio silence since then. Not even a word. And it is disappointing as the Green Party in government that they haven't said things. As I said, it's not going to be something that's going to get big public. People aren't probably that interested in it, but there's a small people that are. But it really should be something that the Green Party should be championing and trying to push. And it's disappointing to hear that there's nothing else you can say about it except that hopefully it'll happen in a couple of months. Do you know what I mean? But it's good to see it, getting such a, it's good at a meeting like this. I think it's really useful, to raise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
John, do you want to? Right. So that situation crossing Spain is immensely frustrating, and indeed, actually, Spain is actually partly in breach of an obligation on timetables. It's supposed to be published at least 3 months ahead of time, and that isn't done. But what I've managed to do through my project is at least actually start some conversation in Spain about precisely that type of project. So there was a big piece in El Confidencial in Barcelona last week about why are all of Spain's international railway connections so bad. So I basically provided them the data and the journalists did the rest, and that ended up starting somewhat a public debate. Now, the EU is trying to fix this with a new piece of legislation which is due to be coming out in October but may be delayed due to political problems with Timmermans having resigned as Vice President of the European Commission, called the MDMS regulation, the Multimodal Digital Mobility Services regulation, which is an opportunity maybe to put some of these problems right, particularly with regard to ticketing. But the problem is that the national railway companies, not the Irish one, but particularly the French, the Spanish, the Germans to some extent, are dead set against the components of MDMS because they wish to protect their national monopoly. So German Railways does not want to have to sell tickets on its website for private rivals in its backyard. What you said going to Italy, there is currently competition on the Paris to Milan route between SNCF, the state operator in France, and Trenitalia, the state operator in Italy. Now, they hate each other. Now, there is no way that the French want to sell the Italian tickets, or the Italians want to sell the French tickets, right? Now, so you have the national state-owned railway companies, which are acting as a powerful lobby against fixing these types of problems. So that is what I'm trying to do by speaking from a kind of grassroots perspective about exactly that, which is to say, hey, look, these are the problems which we're confronting. How do we manage to work through them step by step? Now, what disappoints me, and I'm not really particularly a railway person by background, I'm an EU politics and communications person. I teach EU political communication at a bunch of universities. And I come to working on railways out of need, because I was basically in the same position as you. I was trying to plan these trips, like, why the hell am I stuck here again, right? Now, what there isn't really properly at European Union level is a European passenger rights campaigning organisation. And he who lobbies hardest, because they're almost always men, the transport lobbyists, those that lobby hardest win the battle in Brussels. And the problem is the end users of passenger railways are not really very strongly heard. Now, we have a sympathetic hearing among the Greens EFA. We have some allies among the Liberals, the Renew Europe group, but particularly the Conservatives are not really listening to passenger concerns. So what I must say as well is there is a very good community of people who are trying to put these problems right online, but we face an uphill battle because essentially our lobbying power towards the European Union institutions is essentially comparatively weak, unfortunately. Wait, let me just check if I answer the point. The expense of ferries. Now, for me it was quite interesting, but the ferries were just damned expensive anyway, right? Whether you book really far ahead or not far ahead, they were really expensive. And the point about foot passengers being the lowest of all, right? It would have cost us basically no much more money if we'd had a car to come on this ferry to Cork, right? So that's wrong, because basically it's and also I checked, and I will take that as a folding bicycle from Rosslare to Fishguard. But there was an extra charge to just take a bicycle on board, right? Like, so the whole pricing structure of the ferries is really, really twisted. I don't know what to do about that, but I can nothing but sympathise with your point on in that regard.
And also the Estonian one, that before they connect Finland to Estonia, they're building the Rail Baltica line, so from Tallinn, Riga, Kaunas through to Poland. It is an absolute nightmare of implementation. It's a geopolitically driven project, but the implementation is horrible. And particularly actually on the Polish side of the border, because the Poles are officially committed to it but aren't keen. That's really, really difficult. And so it's a bit the difficulty I think also the Greens have had with some of this, is when the EU has funded a very, very big infrastructure project, how good is the actual implementation? The European Union says we'll finance it, but how well does it work, right? There is the French-Spanish line, Figueres to Perpignan, funded with EU money through the middle of the Pyrenees, which has only 4 trains a day on the high-speed line, right? Now, those types of things are really a scandal, and I think the European Union needs to also pay more attention, not just to the infrastructure, but to the level of service on the tracks. The only case on immigration of limiting it is actually at a non-EU or EU external border, Hungary to Serbia, where I'm aware that there's still a cut on that. Most of the rest that I've encountered is just railway companies or national governments being petty for the sake of being petty, unfortunately, or not being able and willing to fix the problems. But there is one grain of hope in that, is before you come to who should run the train, or what type of train, or how often the train should run, you need a political consensus on both sides of the border if you want to fix the problem. So there are 2 places, northern Finland, northern Sweden, so Tornio-Haparanda, right at the top of the Baltic Sea, and Canfranc, which I mentioned in the video, which goes from Nouvelle-Aquitaine in France to Aragon in Spain, where the regions on both sides of the border are determined they will fix the problem. I am very sceptical about how many trains will ever run through Canfranc because it's so mountainous and tortuous the route. But the politicians on both sides of the border, they want it and they're damn well determined they're going to get it. And that is what then unlocks it. And then you can work out what types of trains, who runs them, how often they should run. And foot passengers, just an anecdote. All our bags got scanned in Roscoff. And I had a penknife with me, which I used also for repairing my bike. It got confiscated. Right, I was not allowed to take that in my hand luggage onto the boat. So I said, well, what happens if I had a kitchen knife in my caravan, which was on the boat? Yeah, that's allowed. But what would happen then if I took that kitchen knife up into the cabin, no, but that would be checked. It's like, are you checking every single bag that everyone takes off every car? No, like, of course you're not, right? So basically, imagine, it didn't really matter, right, my penknife, but imagine I was going on a camping trip and I had camping equipment in my rucksack and I was going on the ferry as a foot passenger, and they're going to confiscate my knife and fork for my camping trip, right? Now, that resulted in an interesting discussion. Apparently they fixed that for ferries between Denmark and Norway, that they have a secure locker in the ferry that foot passengers put their dangerous goods in throughout the crossing. Now, it would seem a viable way and means of fixing that, but your point, you feel like you're the lowest in the hierarchy. Well, I demanded a meeting with the deputy captain on board the ferry to say, why the hell did you confiscate my knife, and have this type of conversation. But he didn't really say, well, we don't really care about this, but he basically said, look, well, Eurostar or bigger ferry operators can do this, but he didn't basically say, well, for us it would just be too much effort, essentially. So yeah, I sympathise completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bit of unity between what everybody said. I think the first thing I'd say is that people matter, that the people in positions of power really matter. And the DG Move, which is the transport side of the European Commission, I think it's no accident that rail has not received the push it needs because of Adina Valian, who's the Transport Commissioner from Romania, from EPP, and Henrik Hollelai, who was up until recently the Director General of DG Move, the Chief Civil Servant. You may have noticed his name on the news. There was issues around how many times he had flown first class to and from Qatar in order to finalise aviation agreements with Qatar. I think he's now in charge of translation studies in the European Parliament. So I think people do matter. And as John pointed out, losing Franz Timmermans as Executive Vice President to run back in Dutch politics is a loss for the European Green Deal within the corridors of power in Brussels. On the plus side, though, unprecedented amounts of money are going into rail in Europe. And Europe matters. Because if you Google a rail map of France, something will pop up from SNCF. It's like a medieval map where you reach the end of known land and then you get whales and sea monsters. And beyond the borders of France, who knows what happens? Because France is the primary issue when it comes to a French transport minister, who I met, was the last minister was incidentally a pilot, and you got the sense that his priorities were elsewhere. Welcome. Welcome in. So I think people matter in all of this, and the people that you put into power, it's hugely important. The second thing I'd say is that companies notice when they are lobbied. And I think if you look at the ferry companies, Brittany Ferries, Stena Line, Irish Ferries, they have all kinds of lovely corporate social responsibility wording on their websites. And I've taken them to task on this. And they write back with rather anodyne letters. But if more than one person writes to them, if a few people write and say, look, this is crazy, this particular aspect of how it works for foot passengers, it can make a difference. And that's Brittany Ferries, Rosslare Bilbao. Yeah, I was looking at myself and my wife going a few weeks ago with a nice cabin. It was going to be €1,400 for the two of us. I added a car. It was going to be $1,400 for the two of us in a car. So foot passengers are second-class citizens, and I think we need to apply pressure on changing that. We need better legislation on railways, and the multimodal ticketing legislation will really help to make it more seamless to get from one side of Europe to another. And it's not easy. I mean, I was in Warsaw in March, I was up in Stockholm, I've taken trains through all these countries, and it is in no way as seamless as we would like it to be. And you have Skyscanner for taking a flight and getting the cheapest flight to and from one place and another. But, you know, if you are, and most of us in this room, we like to take ferries and trains, you end up with 5 tabs open on your computer, and you're about to pay €200 here, and will that, you know, ferry connection still be there if you click yes on that? So I think we've all had that dilemma that gives you grey hairs as to whether the connections will all work out. And yeah, maybe I did overgloss it a bit. It can be great. It can be pretty awful. I've been in Chester realising I'm not going to make the ferry, and you're there till 2 in the morning. Hasn't happened that often, but it has happened often enough for me to be wary. And look, I just, on a practical basis, I fly a lot, but where I can, I take the ferry. I'm going to try and make it to Strasbourg next Monday from Dublin, which is a pretty long schlep, but then I'm flying back, I think, on the following Thursday to be in Dublin for an event on Friday. This is the kind of the life of an MEP. It's not easy, but I think our political role is to try and make it easier. And I think the issues around immigration are never far away. We sit in a parliament that has people to the right in EPP, people to the far right in ECR, and then we have fascists, about 50 absolute fascists in the ID party, who use openly racist language in their contributions in the parliament. So we have to grit our teeth and not necessarily work with them, but we have to sit in the same assembly with them, and it's not easy. The last thing I'd say, though, is the European Parliament. I mean, the kind of rows in politics, the stuff we tend to see is in the Dáil or is in Westminster, when people are roaring at each other. In the European Parliament, 80–90% of the time, we're actually working quite constructively together. You're always trying to find a majority in the middle, where you get people from the left, people from EPP to work together. And certainly I think that's something myself and Grace have been pretty good at, of building alliances to move things forward. And every day can be hugely frustrating. I've spent many years as a councillor, and if somebody wants a bin outside their shop, I could probably have got it next week. And when I was in the Dáil, it might take a year to get legislation through, or a bit longer. In Europe, we still pick up files from 20 years ago and try and get them a bit further forward. So sometimes when you look ahead, you think nothing is moving. But on the plus side, and I'll end on this, when you look behind you, you kind of say to yourself, we're doing things that we never would have thought possible 5 years ago. So there is progress. The green agenda, while it's not in any way going as fast as we would like, it has moved center stage in the last 5 years. There's a bit of a tilt back towards the right and far right at the moment, but we'll try and shift that barometer back the other way over the next 9 months. And hopefully Grace and I will be back in Brussels in June of 2024, and we might even have a colleague from Midlands Northwest.
Anything more on the sail rail ticket to France that was announced?
Yeah, I
What is the status?
was on to Eamon Ryan's office during the week, and Adele Hackett told me that it was moving forward, and then there was technical issues on both sides. I think more on the French side than on the Irish side. I'll try and get more detail on that in the coming days. Adele said, look, we had hoped to have it before the Rugby World Cup because of all the matches in France, but it didn't happen. So I'll try and see how we can progress that.
But honestly, if Ireland can manage to get an agreement with SNCF for this thing, they will have achieved what no other European railway has managed to do, and achieve a working collaboration with SNCF. So honestly, in my experience, that's a really hard one to crack.
I have to say, I haven't had the same challenges of booking tickets across Europe. I mean, trying, it's been straightforward enough, I found. But, and just lastly, I mean, I waited for 45 minutes in Bandon along with 50 other people just for the local bus to get from Bandon to Cork today. So, I'm not going to say it's not all, you want to see 50 people really annoyed out in the sun waiting that long for a bus. So, we need to do that as well,
Absolutely, the small things and the bigger picture.
But overall, listen, I agree with you. We have to be positive and things are moving in the right direction.
And there is also, I mean, there was a mention of Rail Baltica. There is this kind of obsession with shiny new things that cost 5 billion, like this rail line through the Baltics. But getting these cross-border connections right, it could be 10 million, it could be 100. Europe needs to deliver on those things as well.
Louise and have Mary Ryder. Louise, go ahead.
Yeah, Louise Jordan, I'm standing on the northwest side of Cork City. I did the thing from Roscoff back to Enniskillen last year, and I had to help 2 elderly people up to the bus stop. It was absolutely desperate. One of them had damaged his knee on his trip over to France. So we need that. How can we get a shuttle bus from Enniskillen to Cork City? There's no signs.
Well, we should. I mean, there was 22 people waiting at the bus stop, so there should be a connecting bus. And I wouldn't have thought it was beyond the capabilities of Bus Éireann to know when the ferry comes in.
I emailed them last year.
Well, I will certainly try and do that and work with Eamon Ryan to see what can be done. Signage as well as the damn bus. To actually know it's a 7-minute walk, as opposed to kind of walk out on a busy road and hope that you get somewhere.
20 minutes for us. Poor man. And then there was no money to get in the bus. I needed change to get on the CIB bus.
Thankfully, the ticket machine was out of order, so we all got a free bus.
I noticed the zero on it.
I saw the zero. Great.
Mary Ryder.
Okay, this is a much more mundane question. You mentioned, Kieran, that I'm Mary, I'm the Secretary of the Cork Greens, your fares are paid by the European Parliament, that you have an expenses account. I also work for the public, and I would sometimes be having to go places, and there's always an expectation that you pick the cheapest, and you pick the cheapest, or you pick the most efficient in another way. Like, so that if you're going, say, up to Midlands, that you drive because it's shorter than going to Dublin and across, or if you're going to Dublin, that you take the train or the bus because it's cheaper. And so the question really is there any expectation on you when you're putting in your funds into to claim your expenses for to make any kind of a decision, either to make the cheapest or to make the most ethical or to make the least carbon costly or the quickest or whatever it happens to be? Is there any parameter put on your claims?
I've never seen any reference to seeking the lower carbon option. They've sometimes queried why I'm going via London on the way back from Brussels, but the Parliament is okay regarding those claims. I mean, they do allow you to.
They pay 500 as opposed to 50.
No, they've never not done that. Mind you, I think you can claim a first-class fare on whatever means you take, which I would rarely do. Sometimes on the Eurostar if I'm not sure if I'm going to be there, so that the ticket doesn't disappear, so you can move the ticket. I've gone for that.
That's just a question.
But relating to that at a lower level, so I'm often invited to EU conferences to give presentations, and there the ethical challenges are absurd. So I need to get to Santiago de Compostela from Lisbon in October, and I said I need to depart from Lisbon
at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, or whatever day of the week it is. But the problem is I can't actually get to Santiago de Compostela, so instead of having 2 nights in Santiago de Compostela in the hotel, I need a night in Vigo on the way, an early morning train to Santiago de Compostela. And the commission came back to me and said, thank you very much, we propose that we will fly you instead from Lisbon to Santiago de Compostela via Madrid. Right? Now, my presentation in Santiago de Compostela is about railway and sustainable transport, and in block capitals, no way am I doing that. You must book me a hotel in Vigo instead. Oh, and by the way, even though it's greener, it will actually be cheaper. Yeah. So the default in EU events is we'll go of whatever is easiest for us to basically book. So I persuaded them that, and then I got an email off them yesterday going, dear Mr. Worth, we're very sorry, we can't actually book you the train tickets because Portuguese Railways is one of the least digitised railways there is in Europe. You can't get the tickets outside of Portugal. And could you possibly book it? We'll set you this financial limit and you get it reimbursed afterwards. And so that's ultimately how that has ended up. I've had battles all over and with at the kind of administrative level to overcome those types of problems.
I mean, look, the bigger picture and what we're trying to do here is that we're watching our society and our economy in a period of transition. We, the Greens, were maybe first on the issue that we need to tackle climate. And it is changing everything we do, in agriculture, in energy, in transport, in construction. In some areas it's easier than others. If you have a few quid in your back pocket, you can buy the solar panels, you can get electricity from the sun. It's relatively easy. If you're sitting down in a room full of beef farmers, it's more challenging to talk about where we want to be in 10 or 20 years' time. Nonetheless, it is happening. Every new building built today has an A2 energy rating or higher. This was unthinkable 20 years ago. You know, I often call it a gentle revolution, and I was talking to the head of the International Energy Agency at a conference in Paris. He said, Kieran, it's not gentle. The energy stuff is pretty traumatic at the moment. And it was this winter with the price spikes. It was rough, dog rough for many households, for many families. But look, we have a clear idea as to where we're going. It's not that, it's a rocky road to get there. And really, there was an extensive rail and night rail network before low-cost airfares. That probably reached the worst point about 5 or 10 years ago. Yeah. There's some bits of improvement now. I hope in 20 years' time there'll be a lot more connectivity, night trains, easier ways of getting from A to B. Looking around Europe, some railway companies are amazing. Austrian railways, they get this stuff. They run lots of night trains, they're investing in night trains. They're really trying to make rail work better and better. I think some other countries are getting their head around this. They're doing what they can. You'd think the Germans were good, but the German railways have had chronic underinvestment. So there's huge amounts of cancelled trains, late trains. I mean, I often go through Cologne. They have a little special office in the front foyer, and the guy is just there with the claim form filled in to hand to you and the alternative routing. It happens so often. Yeah. And you would never think the Germans would be bad at rail, but they're chronically bad, even though they have brought in this €49 monthly ticket, which is great. And this idea of a climate ticket, it really resonates with people because it's a very practical way.
The €49 Deutschland ticket is, I live in Berlin normally, although I was coming from France for this trip. The €49 Deutschland ticket is an incredible thing and has transformed how you behave in public transport, in regional transport, which is very good.
What does it cover?
So it covers everything except intercity trains. So all regional trains, all metros, all trams, all buses, all whatever other funicular railways, whatever, all city and regional transport, basically. So if you've ever been in a big German city like Frankfurt, for example, and you need to get to Mainz or Wiesbaden or one of the towns around, you take a regional train and you're confronted with this fiendishly complicated ticket machine, like which zones do I need, which times of day. So you've got the Deutschland ticket, you just take the next one, you just get on. So it's simplifying that entire system. Now, if you have time on your hands, you can travel from one end of the country to the other with it, but just on slow trains. Yeah? So basically, to give the kind of Cork example, the commuter train I took from Carrigaloe to Cork, Kent this morning would be included, but the intercity train from Cork to Dublin would not be included. Yeah, and the buses on the streets here would be included. Yeah? But Austria's gone one step further. Their Klima ticket is more expensive. It's €1,000 for a year, but it covers everything, including long distance and intercity trains. So you basically got flat rate public transport for everything in the country for €1,000 for the year. And they have the best railway system in the European Union. Right? Swiss are maybe a bit better outside the European Union, but they're very, very good, and that's an incredible deal.
And it's also very communicable. I remember Maria Vasilescu, she was the deputy mayor, the Green deputy mayor of Vienna, and she introduced the €365 ticket for public transport in Vienna, so €1 a day. And it worked really well, and it helped influence the national stuff that was going on. But I mean, closer to home, the 20% reduction that Eamon Ryan has brought in, and the 50% for young people. Like when my kids kind of go, oh, let's go to Hope, the weather's lovely, and instead of piling into a pal's car, they're now taking the Dart. And you know, the fares are actually changing travel habits. It doesn't happen overnight, and they should be lower again because we're still pretty damn high compared to, not to the UK, but to many places in Europe. But to me, it's low-hanging fruit.
There was
on
a survey. I participated in a survey online there a couple of months ago, and it was on, you know, what would influence your travel choices. But and they looked at not only cost but also reliability and connectivity. And those were the three. So like if it was cheaper but it was later, or if you had to wait longer, or if you got there faster but it wasn't near where you were going, or these kind of things. So they looked at those, and there was a whole lot of, you know, either R's in this thing. So I have no idea how it ended up, but I thought it was a rather interesting way to do a public participation survey. Sorry.
Okay, look, I'm going to call it a day.
All the
We have no, we have time to hang out here. Well, you're putting me under too much pressure. Last question, quickly. Yeah, please, you know, if go on, Hanora. Hanora.
I'm already connecting Green Party candidate for the next election in Cork. My question was just to know what's the problem, because I listened to the presentation, I listened to presentation, fantastic presentation of what we do, and we hear and we see all the investment that all the money that's been invested into the railway in particular, and nobody's using it. Like in Estonia, you can see in Estonia, in Croatia, all the investment building the tracks, and they've been closed and nobody using it. What's the problem? Is it the rail company? Is the government? Is the people in charge in Brussels? You have colleagues there.
Look, it's a bit of everything. Yeah, there are some lines that are underused, but there's a lot of lines where there's huge overcrowding on the railways. So it varies from country to country, and it varies within countries. I think historically railway companies were good at building a railway and maintaining it, but you need to let people know when the trains will go. You need to make sure that there's better connections. You need to promote it in exactly the same way that an airline is talking about its tickets. You know, you cannot go a day without Michael O'Leary or somebody from Ryanair telling you, look, €10 to Vigo. And so you need to compete with that a bit. But you need both the companies to be good at managing what they offer, but you also need political action in Brussels and in Ireland. And I think none of the issues that we discussed today are insurmountable. Some can be solved within a couple of months, some will take a few years. And unlike the big mega projects, which can take tens of billions and take decades to deliver, I think almost all of what we've talked today can be done within a 5 or a 10-year period. So, I mean, I'm optimistic about what can be achieved, but it does take the political momentum to be there, and it takes the people power of pushing pressure on the MEPs, on the bureaucrats in Brussels, on the companies that provide these services, and at a local level to kind of say, look, this doesn't work. I mean, simple things like a notice in Ringaskiddy ferry terminal telling you how to get to the bus. A footpath takes a bit longer, but it can be done.
So the problem, so I live in Germany, and Germany has had transport ministers over the last 20 years, which was the kind of last cabinet position which was allocated, right? where do we stick that guy? Oh, let's give him the transport minister job, right? So it has never had in German politics the degree of political priority that it would be needed. It was considered long-term, technical. That wasn't a place that you made a good political career. Yeah? And I think in Brussels it's been largely the same. Dina Valian, the current European Commissioner for Transport, didn't really have any interest in transport policy before she became Commissioner for Transport. Her predecessor, Violeta Bulc, was at least intellectually a bit more with it. So it would be very, very important to hope that in the next European Commission we have a better European Commissioner for Transport. But let me just end with an anecdote. So at the Belgian-French border, there is a wonderful hospital in the town of Dinant on the Belgian side of the border that can be used by patients from Givet on the French side of the border without any extra documentation and even for outpatient appointments, because Dinant is bigger than the town of Givet. And they basically said, okay, look, these towns are close to each other. Givet, to get to the next French hospital, is much further. Why don't we allow it that the patients just cross the border and go to the hospital, right? Great, right? Exactly what the EU should be fixing in cross-border cooperation. But there isn't a way to get there in public transport, right? So I then go and explain to DG Regional Affairs of the European Commission, hey, look, your great hospital that the patients can get to, they can't get there with public transport. And then the European Commission said, but we didn't know that it was this bad, right? Now, so this then is to me the vital point, and this is also exactly why I'm very appreciative of what Kieran is doing, of practicing what he preaches. You've got to be able to see on the ground if these things work, or what does or does not work. The conversations you have, the places you see, what you experience from that. Yeah? I was in a train from Poland to Slovenia for an EU special event 2 years ago, and I arrived in Ljubljana station. Who is on the platform but the European Commissioner for Transport who flew to Ljubljana to greet a special train? Yeah? Now, so you've got to have, and that for me is good politics, right? You've got to have an understanding of what this is like on the ground and connect that back to the political topic. And that, for me, that kind of bridging that back is what always happens. We all know we've got to fly less and drive less because of climate change. We all know these things at the practical level don't work, and we've got to find a way of managing to bridge that. And that's how I would try and find a way and means of doing it. Yeah? I'm aware that's not a complete answer, but that at least explains a bit my motivation of trying to kind of back out a bit.
Can we have a round of applause for
Hey.
Take some photos. How are you here?
I'm good.
Suzanne.
It's
Suzanne.